Hi patrons, welcome back to part 3 of this tutorial series. So now in this part I want to go through how to decide what colours to use for your colour pencil portraits. So a lot of you guys find it really difficult to pick those initial colours that you actually want to use for your portrait. So you guys find it quite simple to follow along with me because I'm choosing all the colours for you and I tell you what colours I'm using. But when it comes to actually tackling a portrait on your own and deciding what colours you need to use for the undertones, for the blending and all of that sort of stuff, a lot of you guys find that really challenging because I'm not there to guide you and tell you what to use. So for now I want to go through a way that you can kind of get to grips with choosing what colours to use for your reference photo. And to do that, I'm going to tell you the process of how I am going to choose the colours for our next portrait that I'm doing. So in other series, I just tell you what colours I'm using. I don't go through the initial stage of me deciding what colours to use. But I thought it'd be really useful for me to actually explain how I go about deciding what colours to use. So in my mind, I already sort of know what colours that I want to use because I have done it for so long. I know what colours I've got and I just sort of know. But I thought I would really take it down to if I was a beginner again and I had no idea what exactly I would do first to try and figure out what to use. So I've got the reference photo, same reference photo, but twice. This is the printed off version and I've got it on my phone because I prefer the colours on my phone. When I printed it out, I just quickly printed it out for our first one. So the colours aren't as I would want them to be when I do the drawing. I want it more vibrant like my photo on my phone. But I'm going to use this reference to jot down notes for the colours. So I'm going to go through the phone on the reference on my phone and look at these different areas. You can see the vague sort of sketch outline that I did. I kind of rubbed a lot of it off. But I'm going to make notes of the tones that I see in the reference and where they are. And then I'm going to look at my colour pencils and decide which ones fit the notes that I've took. So if I first look at I'm just going to do it for the skin. I'm not going to do it for all of these colours. Just let's focus on the skin tone values. So if I look on the left hand side of his face here, let's zoom in. You can see there's quite a lot of shadow on this side. So this shadow up here, let's look at the actual colours of it. My arrows are awful today. That is not an arrow. I'm rubbing that out. That's going to irritates me. So if we look at this area here, you can see that on the reference it's quite brown toned, but I'm looking at this one, remember, like here it looks slightly green toned, but on my reference it's not green toned, it's more red toned. So I would say it's a red brown. So that is like a red brown. It's also got a hint of sort of warm orange tones, orange glows at the edge. So orange warm tones. Orange warm tones as well. So we know it's already sort of brown and it's also got these more orange tones here. So this is more of the brown tone. Now it's going into more of the oranges here, the more warmer tones. And as we get towards the middle, you can see it starts to go from reddy brown to orangey warm tones to yellow tones. So this is more yellow toned. So I'm just picking out the basic colours. I'm not actually deciding any of the colours that I'm using for my colour pencils. I'm just getting an idea of what actual colours there are, like the undertone values. And what I mean by this is the skin more green undertoned? Is there like hints of green in it? Is it more yellowy toned? Is it more orange toned? Is it more red toned? Or is it more pink toned? So the basic undercolor, the undertone of the skin, the hue that's changing from these areas. So you've got the basic skin tone value, but all of these colours are changing as you go around the face. This is a bit more orange and over here is a bit more yellow. And so that's something that you can use on any portrait to decide what colours to use. So for example, if I was to do my hand, for example, you can see that a lot of my skin tone is obviously a lot lighter, but there's also a lot more pink in it. It's not really yellow or orangey, it's more pink, and there's also more greenish sort of undertones as well. So if you look for the undertones, then you can go for the values, so whether that's a light colour or dark version of that. So because his skin's quite dark, we're going to be using much darker tones than if, for example, we were to do my sort of hand. So we know we're going red brown here, it goes into a bit more orange, it becomes a bit yellow. Now if you look here, you can see that just in this highlight there's a tinge of pink, tinge of red here, so this is a bit more pink toned. So this helps us to decide when we do the skin, we'll have the basic tone, but we'll see what sort of tinges of colours we will need to add to make this nice and realistic. So let's go across here. This again is more sort of pink toned. So this is darker, so it's like a pink and brown. It's not red and brown because this is more sort of red, whereas over here it's just more of a subtle pink. And that continues all around here. Zoom out a bit. So this here, this is more yellow. I'm going to just use a Y for the yellow. So that's more yellow. Up here's more yellow. Let's spot all of the really yellow parts. So this part is really yellow over here. So that's quite yellow. We have a lot of orange tones on the left hand side of the face. So this is very orange over here, and this is very orange. This is just to help us get in our heads the colours and really look at it. A lot of us go in and add the colour pencil, but we don't take the time before to actually study the reference photo and look at these things. And looking at these things is really going to make it a lot easier when you come to colouring, because you can say, oh yeah, I identified that as being more orange tone, so I need to add a bit more orange in this place. But you might not notice that if you didn't do this. You might just decide, okay, that's darker than that, so let's press harder on that pencil and let's just lighten it up, but not look at the different hues. So also there's quite a lot of red here. There's quite a lot of that reddy brown tone. So over here, it's obviously a lot more shadowed, but it's not as sort of reddy orange as over there. It's a lot more sort of pink toned. As we established, it's more of a pink brown. There's also a hint of green undertones. There's a hint of that green undertone and also a pink undertone as well as the brown. And then we've got a bit of orangey red here, so orange, red. There's a highlight there. This here is more orange on the nose, but throughout the whole of the nose it's more yellow. So we've got yellow, but the shadows are more orange toned, and that's something that I noticed. The base and mid-tones are more yellow, but then as you go to the shadows, it becomes more orangey and red. So like this side is more orange, this side is more yellow toned. And I wouldn't do this now for reference, like I wouldn't go and do all of this, but it would be really useful if I was starting out to do this. I don't do this now because I'm kind of doing it in my head as I decide it. I don't necessarily write it down, but it's definitely useful for you guys to get it in your head and to learn. So a lot of the creases in the ear are more orange toned. I want to kind of identify all of the different possible skin tones, so then I can pick my colour pencils for all situations. So a lot of these different skin tones overlap, but I just want to pick out all of the different versions of the skin tones so that I can get colour pencils to fit each type. So also the shadows, that one is just really brown. And this down here is very much like this skin tone, which is like the pink red brown. The shadow under here is more red brown. And also the stubble, the skin tone underneath the stubble, you can see that we're going to have some green undertones a bit. But also we're going to have quite a lot of that orange pink undertones. Same thing with the eyebrows. You can see the facial hair and the eyebrow hair has got a very similar colour to it, very similar undertone. So again, this is more green, orange, pink undertone. Remember, I'm looking very much at this. This has got more green in it, but I'm looking for this reference image. Looking around. I think that's it. There's a lot more yellow in the ear as well. So now that we've gone through all of the skin tones, you can see that we are going to need very much colours of all different undertones. We're going to need some, so if we create like a list up here, we're going to need a variety of orange tones. So orange tones, variety. Because we've got some more intense orange tones like here, it's quite intense, but we've also got some more subtle orange tones, so a variety of the orange tones. And as I've said in the past, the orange tones are more like your burnt ochres. So I know for these areas I need burnt ochres in my Caran d'Ache Luminance set. We've also got quite a lot of yellow tones, so we need a variety of that. And so these are very much your brown ochres. Obviously you can get the brown ochre 10%, 50% and the brown ochre, which creates those different stages of light, mid and dark tones. We're also going to need red/pink tones. And these are known as the burnt siennas. Need more space. Can you see the top? Move you back a bit so you can see the top. There we go. So orange tones are burnt ochres, yellow tones are brown ochres, red and pink tones are burnt siennas. This is for my Caran d'Ache Luminance set, but you'll see what colours I decide and just pick what's close in your set. But kind of learn within your own set of colour pencil what your orange tone skin tones are, what your yellow tone skin tones are, and what are your red pink skin tones. We are also going to need some green undertones. Let's take this list over onto his hair. So we're going to need some green tones, and the greens are known as the raw umbers. Raw umbers. We're going to need some of them. Again, we've got raw umber 10%, 50% and raw umber to create those different stages from light, mid and dark. Also, we're going to need the brown tones. And these are your sepias. I use sepia a lot to create those dark initial brown tones. So you can add some sepia, add some, for example, if we were doing this area here, which I said was a brown red sort of tone that goes into orange, I would add a layer of sepia to get that brown down. For the red brown, I would add a layer of burnt sienna because it's very shadowed, so we want the darkest one. We don't want burnt sienna 10 or 50%. That would be too light. So we want burnt sienna sepia to create that red brown. And as we go towards the edge of that, we fade into a burnt ochre because that's more of the orange toned values. So because we want to go to orange from the reddy brown, we use the burnt ochres. And again, because this is the shadowed colour, we'll probably use a bit of the burnt ochre, so the strongest one, the darkest one, and then fade towards those lighter burnt ochre 50%, burnt ochre 10%, and also then add another bit of brown ochre because it's getting into yellow tone. So that's the way you got to think about it. Obviously, this is a lot of information to take in. But if you just keep rewatching this video, I suppose, and keep practicing it, you will get to grips with it. I know I've spoke pretty fast, I've said a lot of stuff, but that's how I tackle it. So now I'm going to get those colours out and I'm going to show you the values that I would pick. Okay, so what I've done is I've got all of the colours from my Caran d'Ache Luminance set, which fits into all of these colours that we've decided. So I've got all of the raw umbers, the burnt ochres, the brown ochres, the burnt siennas, and I've also got some brown tones and white and cream just as kind of standards that I normally include when I'm trying to decide skin tones. So I also threw in the colour called Russet because this is more like a red tone in case I want to get more saturated reds. But now that I've got all of these colour options in front of me, so I've got the lightest of each set, the darkest, it's time to actually pick which of those I actually need. So for example, I might not need white for the skin tone because none of these areas are really white. I could just keep the buff titanium. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to use any white for the skin tone because it's not needed. None of these areas are bright white, so why would I need it? Okay, so it's about narrowing down these skin tones and not making us so overwhelmed with the options. So buff titanium, this can be used, it's like a creamy colour, it's not white, it's more creamy tone, so this can be used to blend these brightest areas. So we will keep that one. So now we're down to the 3 brown ochres. We've got the brown ochre 10%, 50% and the brown ochre, so from light to dark. So I do think there might be a use for most of these. You can always get a piece of scrap paper. So I've got a bit of scrap paper here. This is the paper that I'm going to be drawing on. And so you could just test these colours, see how dark they actually are. So that's the lightest shade. That's the 10%. Blend them into each other a bit as well. That's the 50%. And that's just the brown ochre. So that's the 3 shades, and I think there will be a use for each of these different tones in the drawing. So I'm going to keep all 3. So next onto the burnt ochres. So we've got the burnt ochre, which is a very peachy tone. Got the burnt ochre 50%, which starts to show more of that orange tone. And then the burnt ochre, which is a lot darker. Those 3 tones. If you put it up against this was something I did for a YouTube video. So you can pull it up against the actual reference and see, is there a possibility that I could use this lightest colour in one of these areas? It might be good for that area. Might be good for some other skin tones. So yes, I'm going to include it because it might come in useful for one of those areas. So next is the burnt siennas. So we've got the lightest burnt sienna, the mid burnt sienna. These are more those pinky reddy tones, and the burnt sienna here. So I like to create the colour chart from the lightest to the darkest in that range. So you can see these are much more pink purpley tones. So again, looking at the reference, is there a possibility of using all of these values? Well, we'll use the darker one for the neck area, especially under here. That will be like a perfect sort of match for that area. But will we be using the lightest shade? We could be using it for the lips. So yes, I'm going to include that as well. But in some skin tones, it might be a lot darker than this, and you might not need to have these lighter tones. So if you're doing someone that has got much darker skin than this, then you might not need to include the lightest of each of these areas. But because we've got highlights in the forehead and stuff, this would come in handy. So now I've also picked the colour Russet. Let's just test this. Am I actually going to need this one? So I was thinking it's not going to be as harsh as this, but I was thinking of using it just like a tiny bit. So just shade a tiny bit on top for the cheeks, just to get a bit more saturation. So now we're going on to the raw umbers. So we've got the raw umber 10%. Remember, these are going to be acting as our undertones and our base. These are, we're not going to be just using this for a whole skin tone because they're too green. But we can use it underneath like our burnt siennas. I think we'll be using all of these in the facial hair, so I'm going to include all of these. So what I want to show you is how I would use this. So for example, if I was doing a shadow tone and I wanted to add some raw umber first, I would shade that on very loosely, say it was darker towards the left hand side, and then the shadow became more faint as we went to the right. So I'd lay down that undertone. If it was green undertoned, okay, so we've got our base tone down. Obviously that's not a skin tone, so what we want to do now is go in with something like our burnt sienna, add that over the top if it's a bit more red toned. Again, more shadow towards the left hand side. So now it looks more like a skin tone. But if we wanted to blend it out, we might want to blend it out with something like the burnt ochre 50%. So you could go in and you could make that more, add a thicker layer of that towards the left hand side where it might be more orange toned, and then fade it out, not use as much pressure as you get towards the left hand side, so that you've blended it out. You've got more of a warm tone towards the right hand side, and then it's more red toned on the left hand side. And this is something that we will be doing when we do like the side over here. And then once you've got that base down, you can go in with lots of other colours. Like say if you wanted to go in with just the burnt ochre, make it more orange toned, you could go in and just add more value on top. Make it more vibrant if you wanted to. If you notice that it's got this is another colour that I want to include. If it's got a bit more of a pink tone, you can go over with a bit of pink to add a bit more vibrancy. So don't just pick a few colours, really go with lots of different colours. So we might want to go in with a bit more of that burnt sienna to darken it up at the sides. Ease that off. And then you might want to blend it back out with the burnt ochre. Obviously these pencils aren't sharpened, but you can kind of see how you could go about creating those skin tones and mixing these together. Now that needs to go here. So where did we get to? So we've done all of these raw umbers. We're going to keep all of them in. So I'm also going to include a black for when we do facial hair. And because I haven't got the sepia colour, I need to buy another one of that. I'm going to use a colour from my Prismacolor set. And it is completely fine to switch between coloured pencil sets. If you don't have a colour in a particular set, you can use both sets together. So I am going to be using the colour Dark Umber, and this is a Prismacolor colour. And finally, Anthracanoid Pink can be used just to add a bit of a healthy pink glow to certain areas. But those are all of the shades that I'm going to be using for the skin tone. Quite a lot of the time I include quite a lot of these skin tones in all of my portraits, but you change the sort of quantity. If you're doing lighter skin, you might only be using a tiny bit of the mid-tones and the darker shades of each of the tones. You might be mainly sticking to the 10% and adding a little bit, whereas when you do darker skin tones, you might be using more of the 50% and just the standard forms rather than the 10%. So you change which sort of ones you're using the most. But anyway guys, that is it for how I would go about choosing the colours for my colour pencil portraits. I really hope you found that useful and learnt a bit. Let me know if you have any questions and I will see you in the next part. Bye everybody.